The Missouri Pacific's whistle had long since faded into the frozen December night when Joanna Reese stepped onto the platform at Dry Ridge Station. The wind cut through her worn traveling coat like a blade through butter, carrying with it the sharp scent of snow and pine from the mountains beyond. She pulled her shawl tighter, though it did little good against the Colorado cold that seemed determined to seep into her very bones. The station was nothing more than a wooden shed with a tin roof, and the platform beneath her boots was slick with frost. A single lantern swayed on its hook, casting dancing shadows across the empty benches. Not a soul waited to greet the late train, not that she'd expected anyone. She'd sent no word ahead, had no kin in these parts, and carried with her only what mattered: a heavy trunk of mason's tools and the invisible weight of a broken engagement. Dry Ridge slumbered under a blanket of stars, its handful of buildings dark save for the saloon at the far end of Main Street, where yellow light spilled onto the frozen mud. Joanna hefted her trunk, muscles straining against its familiar weight. These same strong arms had once built hearths and chimneys throughout the Ozarks, had mixed mortar and laid brick with a precision that made other masons nod in respect, until Thomas Hartley had decided those calloused hands were too rough for a mayor's wife, too masculine for the delicate creature he'd imagined by his side at town socials. A woman shouldn't have hands like a field hand, he'd said. Not 2 weeks past. What would people think? She'd known then what people would think, the same thing they'd always thought: that Joanna Reese was odd, unnatural, a woman who'd learned her trade from her father and refused to set it aside for needlework and tea services. The wedding was off before the invitations were sent. The boarding house stood dark and shuttered, a hand-painted sign creaking in the wind: no vacancy. She tried anyway, knocking until her knuckles ached, but no one stirred. The hotel across the way was likewise dead to the world. Even the saloon, when she peered through its fogged windows, was down to its last few patrons, rough men who looked like they'd as soon rob a woman as help her. Joanna dragged her trunk down the alley beside the saloon, looking for any shelter from the wind. Behind the building, she found it an old storage shed, its door hanging askew on rusted hinges. The roof was mostly intact, though she could see stars through a few gaps. Empty whiskey crates and moldy grain sacks littered the floor, but it was dry. And more importantly, it had walls. She pushed her trunk against the door to keep it closed, then set about making the space habitable. The work warmed her, some shoving crates aside, sweeping debris into a corner with her hands, checking the walls for the worst of the gaps. In her trunk, wrapped in oilcloth, lay her tools, trowels, and hammers, levels and squares, the implements of a trade that had cost her everything and given her purpose in equal measure. From beneath the tools, she pulled a horse blanket, musty but thick. It would do. She'd slept in worse places during her apprenticeship, following her father from job to job across Missouri. At least here she was alone, not crammed into a worker's bunkhouse with men who either treated her like a curiosity or, worse, like prey. The floor was hard beneath her hip as she curled onto her side. The blanket pulled to her chin. Through a crack in the wall, she could see the stars, the same stars that shone over Thomas's fine house in Joplin, where another woman would someday serve tea with smooth, pale hands. Let her. Joanna had built 3 of the 4 fireplaces in that house, and they drew better than any in town. That was worth more than soft hands. She reached out in the darkness, fingers closing around the handle of her best hammer. The wood was smooth from years of use, fitting her palm like it had been carved for her alone. Some women slept with dolls as children. Joanna had slept with this hammer since she was 14. After a drunk laborer had cornered her at a job site, her father had run the man off. But the lesson stuck. Keep your tools close and your guard up. The wind howled through the gaps in the walls, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote answered. Joanna closed her eyes, trying not to think about tomorrow, about finding work in a town that didn't know her name or her skill. Towns like this could be opportunity or disaster for a woman alone. She'd find out which come morning. "You're a fool, Joanna Reese," she whispered to herself, her breath visible in the cold air. "A fool with strong hands and a trunk full of tools." But she'd rather be a fool on her own terms than an ornament on someone else's mantle. That thought, more than the thin blanket or the walls around her, gave her warmth enough to drift toward sleep. Her fingers never loosened on the hammer's handle. Even as her breathing deepened, in her dreams, she built walls that reached the sky, walls that no wind could topple, no man could question, and in those dreams, her hands were exactly as rough as they needed to be. The first pale light of dawn was seeping through the cracks when the shed door rattled against her trunk. Joanna came awake instantly, hammer raised, ready to defend herself, but the rattling stopped, followed by the sound of footsteps moving away. She waited, counting to 100 before carefully shifting her trunk aside and peering out. A man stood in the alley, tall and broad-shouldered, studying the shed's exterior with the critical eye of someone who knew construction. His coat was well worn but clean, his hat pulled low against the morning cold. He didn't look like trouble, but Joanna had learned not to trust appearances. She pushed the door open wider, standing to her full height despite the stiffness in her back. "Something I can help you with?" He turned, and she saw his face clearly weathered but not unkind, with a sort of steady gaze that came from working with horses or cattle. Maybe 35, maybe 40. Hard to tell with men who lived outdoors. "I own this building," he said simply, "or what's left of it." Joanna's chin came up. "I'll move along. Just needed shelter for the night. I can pay for the use, if you're wanting rent." She had little money, but pride demanded the offer. He studied her for a long moment, taking in the trunk, the tools visible through its open lid, the way she held herself ready for either fight or flight. "You're the mason came in on the late train?" It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. "Joanna Reese, and you are—" "Calder Whitlock." He gestured toward the shed roof. "You planning to fix that? Saw you looking at the damage." She paused, caught off guard. "I was just checking the structure. Habit, I suppose." "Habit from what?" "From being a mason." She said it flat out, daring him to comment. He didn't, just nodded slow, like he was thinking something through. The silence stretched between them, not hostile but weighted with possibility. "I've got a wall that's fallen," he said finally. "North side of my house, out past Miller's Creek. If you can lay brick as well as you can size up a roof, I'll trade you breakfast and a proper place to sleep tonight." Joanna felt something ease in her chest, not relief exactly, but the recognition of a chance. "I can lay brick better than most men you'll find this side of Denver." "That's so." A hint of something that might have been amusement crossed his features. "Guess we'll see. You'll want to eat first. Can't work stone on an empty stomach." He turned and started walking, not looking back to see if she followed. After a moment, Joanna grabbed her trunk and did just that, her boots crunching in the frost as she matched his long stride. The town was beginning to stir, a few shopkeepers sweeping their walks. A dog barking somewhere, but Calder Whitlock led her away from Main Street, toward the rise of land where the prairie met the foothills. Behind them, the abandoned shed stood empty once more, but Joanna didn't look back. She'd spent the night on its floor with her hand on a hammer, but morning had brought something else a chance to prove what those rough hands could build, and maybe, though she didn't dare hope it yet, a place to rest them when the day's work was done. The walk to Calder Whitlock's property took them past the last scattered buildings of Dry Ridge and up a winding trail that followed Miller's Creek. The morning sun painted the frost-covered grass gold, and Joanna's breath came in small clouds as she hauled her trunk up the gradual incline. Calder had offered to carry it once, but she'd declined with a look that discouraged further discussion on the matter. His house sat alone on a flat stretch of land, backed by a stand of pines that blocked the worst of the north wind. It was modest but solid log construction with proper chinking, a stone chimney that drew straight and true, The kind of house built by someone who understood the value of doing things right the first time. And there, on the north side, just as he'd said, was the wall, or what remained of it. A section perhaps 12 feet long had collapsed inward, leaving a gaping hole temporarily covered with canvas that snapped and billowed in the breeze. The fallen stones lay in a rough pile, some cracked but most intact. Joanna set down her trunk and walked closer, running her hand along the standing portion of the wall. "Limestone," she said, more to herself than to him. "Good quality. Mortar's worn, though probably original to the house. 20 years, near enough." Calder stood back, watching her work. "My father built it. I've maintained everything else. But masonry." He trailed off with a slight shrug. Joanna knelt beside the fallen stones, checking their condition with practiced hands. Weather got into the mortar, freezing and thawing, year after year. Would have started with just a few loose stones, then once water found its way in. She gestured at the pile. This was bound to happen eventually. "Can you fix it?" She stood, brushing dust from her skirts. "I can rebuild it better than it was, but I'll need mortar lime, sand, and clean water, and it'll take more than a day. I've got sand from the creek bed, and there's a lime cellar in town. Water's no problem." He studied her face, seeming to weigh something. "You always talk this straight. Would you prefer I apologize for knowing my trade?" "No." The word came quick and firm. "No, I wouldn't." He turned toward the house. "Come on, promised you breakfast first." The inside of his home was as spare and practical as the exterior. One large room served as kitchen and living space, with a ladder leading to what must be a loft above. Everything was clean but austere. A table with 2 chairs, a good stove, shelves holding a few dishes and supplies. A man's space. Clearly, but not an unkempt one. Calder moved to the stove with the ease of long practice, setting coffee to boil and pulling a pan from its hook. "Bacon and biscuits all right. Haven't got eggs foxes got into the henhouse last week." "That's more than all right." Joanna stood awkwardly near the door, unsure of the protocol. She'd eaten with work crews plenty of times, but this felt different, more intimate somehow, being in his home. "Sit," he said without turning around, "unless you prefer to eat standing." She sat, watching him work. His movements were economical, no wasted motion, like her with her tools, she thought. When he set a plate before her, the biscuits were golden and the bacon crisp. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but after the cold night, it was exactly what she needed. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Calder spoke. "Where'd you learn the masonry?" "My father, Samuel Reese, out of Springfield. He did churches mostly, some public buildings." She took another sip of coffee. "Started helping him when I was 12, mixing mortar at first, then carrying stones. By 15, I was laying brick alongside him." He didn't mind teaching a daughter. Joanna's jaw tightened slightly. "My mother died birthing me. I was all he had. He said he'd rather teach me a trade than see me dependent on whoever I married." She paused. "Turns out he was right about that." Calder's eyes flicked to her left hand, bare of rings, but he made no comment. "Smart man." "He was." The past tense hung between them. "Lung fever took him 2 winters back. I've been working on my own since then." "That why you came to Dry Ridge work dried up back home?" She could lie, make up some story about seeking opportunity, but something about his steady presence, the way he'd watched her examine his wall without a trace of skepticism, made her want to be honest. "I was engaged, to be married, but my betrothed decided a woman who laid brick wasn't suitable for a man of his standing." His loss. The simple statement, delivered without inflection as he refilled her coffee, somehow meant more than any amount of sympathy would have. Joanna found herself relaxing slightly. "Tell me about the wall," she said, ready to move to safer ground. "Just the one section that's failed. So far, but I worry the whole north side might go if we get another hard winter." He pushed back from the table. I'll show you what materials I've got on hand. They spent the next hour going over the project properly. Calder had more supplies than she'd expected, leftover stone from various repairs. Some decent tools, though nothing specialized for masonry. He showed her where she could mix mortar, where the water pump was, how the canvas covering attached to protect the opening. I'll need to clear all the loose mortar from the standing wall first, Joanna explained, running her hand along the joints. Then rebuild from the foundation up. If I do it right, this wall will outlast the rest of the house. You'll stay here while you work. It wasn't quite a question. Seems foolish, you going back and forth to town. There's the loft, it's not much, but it's warm and dry. Joanna hesitated. Staying in a man's home, even for work, went against every propriety she'd been taught. But then, so did her profession, and the memory of last night's cold shed was still fresh in her bones. I'll sleep down here, near the stove, she said, if that's acceptable. Suit yourself. He moved to a chest in the corner, pulling out blankets and a pillow. I keep odd hours anyway, up before dawn, sometimes out late checking on things. You'll have privacy enough. By noon, Joanna was deep in the work. She'd changed into her work clothes, a split skirt that allowed for movement, and a man's shirt worn soft with age. Her hair was pinned up tight, covered with a kerchief to keep the dust out. Calder had gone to town for lime, leaving her to begin the careful process of cleaning the standing wall. It was good work, honest work, the kind that left her muscles tired and her mind clear. Each stone she removed was examined, set aside if sound, discarded if cracked. The old mortar came away in chunks, revealing the bones of the structure beneath. You look like you're performing surgery. She turned to find Calder had returned, a sack of lime over his shoulder. He set it down near her work area, then stood back to watch. In a way, I am. She pointed to a section she'd cleared. See how your father laid these stones, overlapping joints? Everything level. He knew what he was doing. It's just time that's been the enemy. Time's nobody's friend out here. He handed her a canteen of water. You'll want to pace yourself. Sun gets brutal in the afternoon, even in winter. She drank gratefully, noting how he didn't hover or offer unnecessary advice. So many men felt compelled to instruct her in her own trade, but Calder simply let her work. When she began mixing the first batch of mortar, he watched with interest but no interference. Like making bread, he observed, getting the consistency right. Similar principle. Too wet and it won't hold, too dry and it cracks. She added water gradually, working the mixture with her trowel. My father used to say mortar had moods, like horses. You had to learn to read them. The afternoon passed in concentrated work. Joanna began laying the foundation course, each stone precisely placed and leveled. Calder went about his own business. She caught glimpses of him working with horses in a corral behind the house, repairing tack, splitting wood, but every so often she'd sense him nearby, watching her progress with that same quiet assessment. As the sun began dropping toward the mountains, painting the sky orange and pink, she stood back to evaluate her progress. The foundation was reset, the first 3 courses laid. Tomorrow she'd continue building up, assuming her work met his standards. It's looking solid, Calder said from behind her. She hadn't heard him approach. You weren't boasting about your skill. I don't boast, I just state facts. She wiped her hands on a rag, suddenly aware of how she must look covered in mortar dust, hair escaping its pins, sweat-stained despite the cold. I'll clean up the work area before dark. Leave it. Come eat something first. You've been at it for hours. Inside, he'd prepared another simple meal stew this time, with fresh bread from town. They ate as the light faded outside, and Joanna felt the pleasant exhaustion that came from a day's good work. Her hands were chapped from the cold and the lime, but it was a familiar discomfort. I'll start the foundation check on the rest of the north wall tomorrow, she said. Best to know what we're dealing with before the ground freezes solid. He looked up from his bowl. She flushed slightly. Your wall. I meant your wall. I know what you meant. He stood to clear the dishes. I've got business in town tomorrow morning. You'll have the place to yourself till noon. After he climbed to the loft, Joanna arranged her makeshift bed near the stove. The house was so much warmer than the shed, the blankets clean and plentiful. She lay listening to the settling of the logs, the pop of the dying fire. Overhead, she could hear Calder moving about, then silence. For the first time in months, she didn't fall asleep clutching her hammer. Her tools were just across the room. True, but somehow she didn't feel the need to keep them at hand. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or the good meal, or simply the strange comfort of being in a place where her skills were valued rather than scorned. Tomorrow there would be more work, more stone and mortar and the satisfying geometry of a wall rising true. But tonight, she simply let herself rest. No longer a woman out of place, but a mason with a job to do. In the darkness, she smiled. Thomas Hartley would be appalled. Good, she thought, and slept. A week had passed since Joanna first set foot on Calder Whitlock's property, and the wall was rising steadily under her hands. Each morning she woke to find fresh firewood stacked by the stove and coffee already brewing Calder's doing, though he never mentioned it. He was always gone by the time she stirred, out checking fence lines or working with the half-wild horses he seemed to collect like some men collected debts. The house on the hill had become a strange sort of refuge. It was empty and echoing when Calder was away, filled only with the whistle of wind through the pines and the occasional cry of a hawk. But there was peace in that emptiness, a kind of silence that felt purposeful rather than lonely. She could work without interruption, without the weight of watching eyes or whispered judgments. On this particular morning, frost painted intricate patterns on the windows, and her breath misted in the air even inside. She dressed quickly in her work clothes, wrapping an extra shawl around her shoulders before stepping out to examine her progress. The wall stood nearly complete now, lacking only the final courses and capstones. She was mixing mortar when she heard the horses, not the measured clip-clop of Calder's mare, but multiple hooves moving fast and careless. 3 riders appeared on the trail, young men from town by the look of them. Joanna recognized the type bored, privileged, looking for amusement wherever they could find it. Well, the one in front, barely past 20 with an attempted mustache, reined up near her work area. So it's true. Calder's got himself a woman up here. Joanna kept working, adding water to her mortar with deliberate calm. I'm a mason. Mr. Whitlock hired me to repair his wall. The 3 exchanged glances, snickering. A mason, the second one repeated, though what they're calling it these days. Must be nice work, the third added, eyeing her masculine attire with distaste. Keeping old Calder warm at night, though I can't imagine what he sees in a woman who dresses like a man. Heat rose in Joanna's cheeks, but she kept her voice level. The only thing I'm keeping warm is this mortar. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. The leader dismounted, swaggering closer. Come now, don't be unfriendly. We rode all the way up here to see the curiosity. Lady Mason. He said it like it was a joke. Why don't you show us what those hands can do besides lay brick? They can swing a hammer well enough to crack a skull, Joanna said quietly, her fingers tightening on the trowel. Would you like a demonstration? He laughed, but there was uncertainty in it now. Feisty. No wonder Calder keeps you around. Though what kind of man needs a woman to build his walls must be getting soft in his old age. The kind who values skill over swagger. They all turned. Calder sat his horse at the trail's bend, rifle laid casual across his saddle horn. His expression was mild, almost pleasant, but something in his stillness made the young men step back. Morning, boys. Little far from town. Aren't you? Just riding. Calder. The leader's bravado deflated considerably. Heard you had a visitor. Wanted to welcome her proper. Miss Reese has been properly welcomed. Now I'm sure you have business elsewhere. He didn't move, didn't raise his voice, but the dismissal was clear as mountain water. They mounted up with exaggerated casualness, the leader trying to salvage some dignity. No offense meant. Calder, just curious is all. Curiosity's natural, so's minding your own business. Give my regards to your fathers. They left at a considerably faster pace than they'd arrived. Calder dismounted, leading his horse to the corral without a word about the incident. Joanna returned to her mortar, but her hands shook slightly as she worked. "Thank you," she said when he came back, hating the tremor in her voice. "I could have handled them, but—" "I know you could have." He picked up a stone from the pile, examining it with apparent interest. "Saw you drive off 2 drifters from a work site in Pueblo once. You had a pickaxe that time." She stared at him. "You... what?" "3 summers back, I was there buying cattle. You were working on the bank building." He set the stone down carefully. "That's why I wasn't surprised when you stepped out of that shed ready to fight. Already knew you had spine enough for 10 men. Why didn't you say something?" He shrugged. "Wasn't relevant. You needed work. I needed a mason. Your reputation in Pueblo was solid. Asked around before I made the offer." A slight smile touched his mouth. "Though I'll admit, I didn't expect you to be sleeping in abandoned sheds." Joanna felt oddly exposed, knowing he'd seen her before, known her work. "And you don't mind what those boys implied?" "Let them imply what they want. They see what they expect to see." He moved toward the house. "I see a wall that'll stand another 50 years because it's being built right. That's all that matters to me." That evening, the temperature plummeted. Wind howled down from the mountains like a living thing, rattling the windows and finding every crack in the walls. Joanna built up the fire, but the cold seemed to seep through everything. She'd been sleeping on the floor for a week now, and while she'd never complain, her bones ached from it. She was adding another log to the stove when she heard something from above, a sound like breaking wood. Then, cursing. Calder came down the ladder looking irritated, a broken chair leg in his hand. "Damn thing finally gave up. Been meaning to fix it for months." He tossed the piece into the fire. "No matter. Floor's good enough." "You can't sleep on the floor in your own house. Take the blankets down here. I'll be fine." "So we'll both freeze for the sake of propriety." He shook his head. "There's sense and then there's foolishness. Miss Reese." They stood facing each other in the flickering firelight, both too proud to take comfort while the other suffered. Finally, Calder gestured to the space near the stove. Room enough for 2 to sleep warm without impropriety. 1 side each, backs to the fire. Unless you'd prefer we both catch our death being proper. It was practical, sensible, and still. Joanna hesitated, but the wind chose that moment to send a particularly vicious gust down the chimney, making the fire gutter. And practicality won. They arranged themselves carefully, fully clothed, blankets separate but close enough to share the heat. Joanna lay rigid at first, hyper-aware of his presence just feet away, but gradually, the warmth and exhaustion took hold. Sometime in the night, she found herself talking to the darkness. "I used to build castles, when I was small, not from blocks from mud and stones by the creek. My father would find me covered in dirt, constructing elaborate fortresses. He said he knew then I'd follow his trade." Calder's voice came quiet from the other side of the fire. "I collected strays, birds with broken wings, orphaned rabbits. Drove my mother to distraction. She said I'd either be a veterinarian or a fool. Turned out to be a bit of both." "Is that why you have so many horses?" "Partly. Buy them cheap when others give up on them. Most just need patience and a steady hand." A pause. "Like walls, I suppose. Fix the foundation and the rest follows." They talked sporadically through the night, nothing deep or revealing. Just the rambling conversations of 2 people keeping the dark at bay. He told her about finding this land, about building the house with his father. She shared stories of job sites, of the satisfaction in seeing something rise from nothing. When dawn finally broke, They rose without awkwardness. Simply two people who'd weathered a cold night practically. But something had shifted. The house felt less empty, the silence less absolute. Over breakfast, Calder pushed a cup across the table. There's something in there besides coffee, whiskey, medicinal purposes. You were talking in your sleep. Joanna paused with the cup halfway to her lips. What did I say? I don't want to sleep. Kept repeating it. Bad dreams. She took a long sip, feeling the burn of the whiskey. Sometimes I dream about things falling, walls collapsing, everything I've built turning to rubble. She set the cup down carefully. Started after my father died, after I realized how quickly solid things can disappear. That why you sleep with your hand on that hammer. You notice that? I notice most things. He refilled both their cups. This time, just coffee. Can't say I blame you. World's not kind to women alone, especially those who don't fit the expected pattern. And you, she found herself asking, why alone up here handsome enough man with property? Town must have daughters they're trying to marry off. Had a wife once, Sarah, sweet girl, pretty as spring flowers. His voice held old pain worn smooth. Wanted me to be something I wasn't. Moved to Denver, work in her father's shipping business. Wear suits and talk numbers instead of horses. He shrugged. She left after 2 years. Said I loved the land more than her. Might have been right. I'm sorry. Don't be. We both wanted different things. Better to know it early than spend a lifetime pretending. He stood. Conversation clearly ended. Best get to that wall. Looks like snow coming. She worked through the morning, laying the final courses with extra care. Each stone precisely placed, each joint packed tight with mortar. By afternoon, clouds had rolled in dark and heavy, and the first fat snowflakes began to fall. Need to get the capstones on before this gets worse, she called to Calder, who was securing everything loose around the property. Leave it. Come inside before... Thunder crashed overhead, winter thunder, rare and ominous. The snow turned from lazy flakes to a sudden, driving wall of white. Joanna ran for the house. Calder right behind her. They burst through the door just as the world outside disappeared into swirling chaos. Blizzard, Calder said unnecessarily, shaking snow from his hat. Could last hours or days. Hope you weren't planning on going anywhere. Joanna moved to the window, watching her nearly complete wall vanish into the white. All that work. And now the mortar would freeze before it fully cured. The wall. We'll be there when this passes. You built it true. Weather can't change that. She turned from the window to find him watching her with that steady gaze. You sound certain. I am. Seen your work now. You build things to last. Joanna Reese. That's rare. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the fire crackled and coffee bubbled on the stove. Two people who'd chosen solitude over surrender sat at a rough wooden table, playing cards with a worn deck as snow piled against the windows. That night, without discussion, they made their beds by the fire again. The storm howled like a living thing, but inside was warmth and quiet companionship. Just before sleep took her, Joanna realized she'd forgotten to keep her hammer close at hand. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't dream of falling walls. The blizzard had left 3 feet of snow in its wake, transforming the landscape into something pristine and alien. When Joanna finally ventured out to check her wall, she found it standing solid despite the storm's fury. The mortar had set well enough, though she'd need to do some touch-up work once the weather warmed. It was on her second trip to town for supplies that she truly felt the weight of the community's judgment. The general store fell silent when she entered. Conversations stopping mid-sentence. Mrs. Henderson, the store owner's wife, looked her up and down with pursed lips. Miss Reese. The greeting was cold as the wind outside. We heard you've been staying at the Whitlock place. I'm working there, repairing the north wall. Joanna kept her voice neutral, moving to gather what she needed. Lamp oil, coffee, flour. Working, Yes, Mrs. Henderson exchanged glances with two other women near the fabric counter. All alone with him up there. Rather unusual arrangement. No more unusual than a woman running a store, Joanna replied, setting her purchases on the counter. Yet here you are. That's entirely different. I work alongside my husband, as is proper. Mrs. Henderson's face flushed. Not living unmarried with a bachelor, dressed in whatever those garments are supposed to be. Joanna looked down at her split skirt and work coat. They're supposed to be practical, ma'am. Hard to lay brick in petticoats. A younger woman near the door whispered to her companion, loud enough to be heard. She was engaged to Thomas Hartley, you know, the mayor over in Joplin. He threw her over because she insisted on doing men's work. Can you imagine choosing bricks over a respectable marriage? Perhaps some of us prefer building something with our own hands rather than decorating someone else's prison, Joanna said quietly, but with an edge that made the whisperer step back. Mr. Henderson appeared from the back room, clearly sensing tension. That'll be $2. Miss Reese, will Mr. Whitlock be settling the account? I settle my own accounts. She placed the money on the counter with unnecessary force. Good day. Outside, she nearly collided with Reverend Morrison, the town's Presbyterian minister. He steadied her with gentle hands, his aged face kind but concerned. Miss Reese, I've been hoping to speak with you. If it's about my immortal soul, Reverend, I assure you it's in no more danger than it was last month. He smiled slightly. I'm more concerned with your mortal reputation. My dear, the talk in town is just that, talk. She adjusted her parcels, ready to move on. Perhaps, but talk has a way of becoming truth in small towns. If you were to take lodgings with Mrs. Brant, she has a room available. It might quiet some of the gossip. Mrs. Brant, who told me she had no vacancies the night I arrived. Joanna shook her head. I'll not beg for shelter from those who denied it when I needed it most. Besides, my work isn't finished. And when it is, she met his eyes squarely, then I'll find more work. It's what I do. Reverend, it's who I am. He sighed. I've heard you're skilled at your trade. It's admirable, truly. But the world isn't always kind to women who walk their own path. No, she agreed. But it's even less kind to those who don't. When she returned to Calder's house, she found him in an unusual state papers spread across the table, a legal-looking envelope torn open beside them. His expression was grim. Trouble. She set down her purchases, noting the official seals on several documents. Railroad company? He pushed a letter toward her. They want to buy my land. All of it. Planning to run a spur line through here to connect with the mines in the mountains. Joanna read quickly. The offer was generous, more than generous. Enough money to set a man up for life. That's substantial. It is. He gathered the papers together with sharp movements. Turn it down, and they'll likely find ways to make my life difficult. Accept it, and I lose everything that matters. She thought of her own losses, her father, her home, her planned future with Thomas. Sometimes we don't get a choice in what we lose. No, but sometimes we do. He stood abruptly. I need to think. Check on the horses. She watched him go, understanding the weight of the decision. After a moment, she began preparing supper, giving him the solitude he needed. The work of cooking grounded her simple, necessary tasks that resulted in something tangible. He returned as darkness fell, snow dusting his shoulders. They ate in companionable silence until he spoke. If I take their money, I could go anywhere. California, Oregon. Start fresh somewhere nobody knows my history. Is that what you want to be unknown? Sometimes. He pushed food around his plate. You understand that. I think the appeal of being judged only for what you do, not what you are. Except we carry what we are wherever we go. She rose to clear the dishes. I could change my name tomorrow, pretend I've never held a trowel, play at being the proper lady Thomas wanted. But my hands would still itch for work, and I'd wake up hating the lie. So what would you do in my place? She considered carefully. I'd ask myself where I feel most like who I'm meant to be. Here, on this land you know like your own bones, or somewhere else. Pockets full of money, but soul empty of purpose. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, when did you know that you'd rather be alone than be someone false? The day Thomas looked at my hands with disgust. He'd held those same hands the night before, told me he loved them, but in daylight, with his political friends watching, they became something shameful. She dried the last plate with careful precision. I knew then I could scrub them smooth, hide them in gloves, pretend they'd never known honest work, or I could keep building and let him walk away. Do you regret it? I regret that love wasn't enough to make him see me truly, but choosing my work over his conditions, never. Later, as had become their custom, they settled by the fire. The temperature had dropped again, making the house crack and settle around them. Calder fed another log to the flames, sending sparks spiraling up the chimney. I've decided, he said suddenly. I'm keeping the land. Good. They won't give up easily. Railroad companies rarely do. Then you'll need strong walls, she said simply. Good thing you know a mason. He looked at her then, something shifting in his expression. Joanna? A sharp crack interrupted him, not the house settling, but something striking the window. Then another, rocks or chunks of ice. They could hear horses outside, whooping voices. Stay here. Calder reached for his rifle, but Joanna was already moving. They stepped onto the porch together to find half a dozen riders circling the house, faces obscured by scarves. One carried a torch, waving it dangerously close to the walls. Whitlock. The leader's voice was young, slurred with drink. Heard you're too good for railroad money, too good for progress. Maybe you need persuading. Calder raised the rifle, not quite aiming. You boys have had your fun. Time to head home. Not till you send your woman out, another rider called. Town doesn't need her kind. Working women bring nothing but shame. The only shame here is grown men acting like children. Joanna stepped forward, and Calder moved instinctively to block her. She sidestepped him. You want to burn something down because it frightens you, because it doesn't fit your narrow view of the world. Then you're weaker than any woman who's ever lifted a stone. The torchbearer spurred closer, face twisted with anger. Shut your mouth, or... Calder's rifle cracked, the torch spinning from the man's hand into the snow. Or nothing. Get off my land. Don't come back. They milled uncertainly, bravado fading against the reality of the gun. Finally, the leader wheeled his horse. This isn't over. Whitlock, railroad's got long arms, and your Mason woman won't protect you from what's coming. They thundered off into the darkness, leaving silence and the smell of smoke. Calder lowered the rifle slowly. Pack of damn fools, probably railroad money behind it, stirring up the worst in people. He turned to her. Are you all right? Fine. But her voice shook slightly. The torch, the circling riders, it brought back memories of other nights, other threats. They were right about one thing. My presence here makes things worse for you. No. The word came firm and immediate. Don't let them put that in your head. You've brought nothing but good to this place. He gestured to the wall, standing solid in the moonlight. You've made it stronger. That threatens them because they profit from weakness. Inside, they found one window cracked from the thrown stones. Joanna swept up the glass while Calder boarded over the break. Working together in the lamplight, the house felt like a fortress not against the world, but a place to stand firm within it. Thank you, she said quietly, for not asking me to leave. Most men would, to avoid the trouble. I'm not most men, and you're not most women. He finished securing the board. Besides, that wall's not quite finished. Be ashamed to let someone else complete it. She smiled slightly. It would at that. That night, neither suggested returning to separate sleeping arrangements. They made their beds by the fire as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The house creaked and settled around them, the boarded window a reminder of the world's hostility. "I've been thinking," Calder said into the darkness, "about hands." "Oh. How they show what we are. Yours, with their strength and skill. Mine, scarred from wire and rope. Sarah used to make me wear gloves to church, hide the evidence of work." A pause. "I hated those gloves. Thomas bought me a pair once, kid leather, pearl buttons, said they'd make me look more refined." She flexed her fingers unconsciously. "I used them to hold hot bricks, ruined them in a day." "Good for them." His voice held amusement. "Bet they worked better than bare hands for that." "They did. Only practical use they had." Silence fell, comfortable and warm. Outside, wind whistled through the pines, but inside was safety and understanding. Two people who'd chosen their work over easier paths, finding unexpected shelter in each other's stubbornness. Just before sleep, Joanna murmured, "Those men tonight, they'll be back." "Probably." "Doesn't frighten you." "Less than giving up what matters does." A pause. "What about you?" She thought about it, about threats and torches and the weight of standing apart. "I've been frightened my whole life, of not being good enough, of being too much, of ending up alone. But tonight," she trailed off. Tonight I remembered that some things are worth defending, even if the walls crack, even if the whole world says you're wrong to try." In the darkness, she heard him shift, perhaps nodding. No more words were needed. They slept while snow began to fall again, covering the tracks of horses and the burned place where the torch had fallen. By morning, the world would be white and clean again. But the cracks in the window would remain, a reminder that choosing your own path came with a price. And in the growing light of dawn, as Joanna woke to find new wood already stacked by the stove and coffee beginning to warm, she thought perhaps some prices were worth paying after all. The wall stood complete now, straight and true against the winter sky. Joanna ran her hand along the capstones one final time, checking for any imperfection, though she knew she'd find none. 2 weeks of work had restored not just the structure, but something in herself, the certainty that her hands could still create, rather than just remember. "It's fine work," Calder said from behind her. He'd been watching her final inspection with that quiet attention she'd grown accustomed to. "Better than the original, I'd say." "It should last your lifetime and beyond." She stepped back, brushing mortar dust from her hands. "The foundation's solid now. Won't fail again." Something passed across his face, a flicker of expression she couldn't quite read. "About that, I've been thinking." Before he could continue, they heard horses approaching. Not the wild gallop of night riders, but a measured pace. A small group appeared on the trail. Reverend Morrison, Mrs. Henderson from the general store, and, surprisingly, Mrs. Eleanor Caldwell, the banker's wife and arguably the most influential woman in Dry Ridge. "Mr. Whitlock, Miss Reese." Mrs. Caldwell remained mounted, looking down at them with sharp, assessing eyes. "We've come to discuss a proposition." Calder's stance shifted subtly, protective. "State your business, Eleanor." "The Women's Auxiliary has been discussing the need for a new church foundation. The current one has, shall we say, structural concerns." Her gaze moved to Joanna. "We understand you have expertise in such matters." Joanna blinked, caught off guard. "You're offering me work?" "I'm offering you respectability," Mrs. Caldwell said bluntly. "Take the job, move into town properly, and put an end to this irregular arrangement. It benefits everyone." "Everyone except me," Calder said quietly. "Since I'd lose a skilled mason who's already proven her worth." "Mrs. Henderson sniffed. "Really, Calder, surely you can see how this looks. An unmarried woman, living here." "Working here," Joanna corrected. And my job is now complete, so your concerns are moot. Then you'll take the church position, Reverend Morrison asked hopefully. The pay would be fair, and Mrs. Brandt has agreed to rent you a room. Joanna felt the weight of the moment. Here was escape from gossip, a chance for legitimate work in town. She glanced at Calder, but his face had gone carefully neutral. I appreciate the offer, she said slowly. I'll need to consider it. Don't consider too long, Mrs. Caldwell warned. The town's patience isn't infinite, and neither is this opportunity. She wheeled her horse with practiced ease. Good day. After they left, silence stretched between Joanna and Calder. Finally, he spoke. It's a good offer, steady work, place in town. You'd be a fool not to take it. Would I? She began gathering her tools, movements sharp. Yesterday the town wanted me gone. Today they want my skills, but only on their terms. Tomorrow they'll find new conditions for their tolerance. Still better than... He stopped abruptly. Then what then here? The words came out harder than intended. You're right, of course. I should go. Your wall's complete. Your reputation's suffered enough. We can part as employer and worker. Nothing more. She hefted her tool chest, started toward the house to gather her few belongings. Calder caught her arm the first time he'd touched her deliberately. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? She faced him, suddenly exhausted. Because I'm tired of reading between lines, of guessing what people think but won't say. Thomas did that, acted one way in private, another in public. If you want me gone, just say so. I don't want you gone. The words seemed pulled from him. That's the problem. This was supposed to be simple. You'd fix the wall, I'd pay you, you'd leave. But instead, he released her arm, running a hand through his hair. Instead, the house feels empty when you're not in it. I catch myself looking for you when I come in from the fields. The coffee tastes wrong when you don't make it. Joanna set down the tool chest slowly. Calder. I know what I am. He continued. A loner who prefers horses to people. Set in my ways, too old to change. You could do better. Hell, you could take that church job. Find a man who doesn't come with railroad troubles and a reputation for oddness. I could, she agreed. Just like you could sell to the railroad and find a wife who'd never touch a brick or wear split skirts or embarrass you at social functions. Is that what you think, that you'd embarrass me? He moved closer. Joanna, you're the first real thing I've seen in years. Every board in that house, every stone in these walls, they're honest. They are what they are. You're the same. No pretense, no games, just skill and spine and... He stopped, seeming to realize how close they stood. The winter sun caught the silver threading through his dark hair, the lines around his eyes that came from squinting into distance. And, she prompted softly, and I'm being selfish, asking you to stay when the town's making it clear what that costs. You haven't asked me to stay. No, I haven't. He met her eyes. Because I'm afraid of what you choose. The wind picked up, setting the pine branches whispering. Joanna thought of her life before the constant movement, the cold rooms, the weight of solitude. Then she thought of these past weeks waking to split wood and brewing coffee, working while Calder moved about his business, evenings by the fire, talking or not talking, equally comfortable either way. I need to think, she said finally. The church job, it's worth considering. He nodded, stepping back. Of course, take the time you need. That evening felt different. They moved around each other carefully, too aware of words said and unsaid. Joanna made biscuits that came out heavy. Calder forgot to salt the stew. They ate in silence, thick as molasses. As night fell, Joanna stood at the repaired window, looking out at the wall she'd built. My father used to say the hardest part of masonry wasn't the lifting or the precision. It was knowing when to set a stone and when to wait. Wise man. He was, but he was also alone most of his life. Never remarried after my mother, never let anyone close, said it was simpler that way. She turned from the window. I used to think he was right. After Thomas, especially. Simpler to just work, just build, just move on. And now I wonder if simple and right are the same thing. Calder rose from the table, crossed to stand beside her. Not touching, but close enough she could feel his warmth. I've been alone 5 years, never minded it. Had my land, my horses, my peace. Then you showed up with your tools and your stubborn chin, and suddenly alone felt less like a choice and more like cowardice. I should take the church job, she said quietly. For both our sakes. Probably. It's the practical thing. It is. The town might accept me, in time, if I follow their rules. They might. She turned to face him fully. Do you want me to take it? I want, he paused, seeming to weigh each word. I want you to choose what makes you feel most yourself, not what's expected or proper or safe, just what's true. The trouble with truth, she said, is that it doesn't care about expectations. No, it doesn't. They stood there, two people who'd built their lives on independence, facing the terrifying possibility of interdependence. Finally, Joanna moved to her makeshift bed, began laying out the blankets with mechanical precision. Where will you go? Calder asked. If you take the job. Mrs. Brant's, apparently small room in the back, away from her regular boarders. She smoothed a wrinkle that didn't exist. It has a window that faces east. Good morning, light. That's good. Light's important. Yes. He climbed to the loft without another word. Joanna lay in the dark, listening to him move about overhead, then settle. The house grew quiet except for the pop of the dying fire and the eternal wind. Sleep wouldn't come. She found herself cataloging sounds she'd grown accustomed to, the particular creak of the third floorboard from the door, the way the chimney whistled in a north wind, the rustle of mice in the walls that Calder's barn cat hadn't yet caught. Mrs. Brant's boarding house would have different sounds, footsteps overhead, voices through thin walls, the clatter of communal meals, and rules, so many rules about proper behavior, suitable hours, appropriate dress. She'd follow them. Of course, she'd learned to fit herself into acceptable shapes before. But here she wore what suited the work. Here she woke when her body said wake, slept when tiredness took her. Here her hands stayed rough and strong, and no one suggested gloves. Here someone built up the fire before dawn so she woke to warmth, left coffee ready so she didn't have to wait. Here she was, just Joanna, not a curiosity or a problem to be solved. A board creaked overhead, then another. Footsteps on the ladder. Careful but purposeful. Calder appeared in the dim glow from the banked fire. Can't sleep either, she asked unnecessarily. Keep thinking about something. He moved closer, still careful of propriety even now. The church foundation, I know that work. It's not just repair. They want it expanded, reinforced for a bell tower. 3 months' work, maybe 4. Good wages for that long. Yes, but here's what I'm thinking. He sat on the floor. Not close, but not far. The railroad's not giving up. They'll pressure the bank, maybe interfere with my selling horses or buying supplies. I'll need to make improvements. Show the land's being used productively. Smart. I want to build a workshop, proper outbuilding for equipment, maybe expand the stable, winter quarters for the horses I'm training. He paused. Work enough for a mason who wanted it. Room and board included, same as before, but permanent, if she was inclined. Joanna's heart did something complicated in her chest. Calder, I'm not asking for anything beyond work, just offering an alternative. You could take both jobs, church during the day, stay here where it's practical for the building work. Best of both situations. The town would never accept that. It would look like I hired a mason for ongoing projects. Nothing improper about commerce. A slight smile touched his mouth. Besides, if the railroad wants to play at pressure, might as well give them something real to worry about. Hard to force a man off land he's actively improving. You've thought this through. Had to, once I realized. He stopped, shook his head. Doesn't matter. What matters is you having choices, real ones, not just what others decide you deserve. They sat in companionable silence while the fire settled lower. Finally, Joanna spoke. If I stayed for the work, we'd need to set things properly. Written agreement, clear terms, for both our protection. Of course. And I'd want to build my own room, off the kitchen, maybe, proper walls, proper door, my own space. Sensible? I've got seasoned lumber stored. We could start tomorrow. You think I'd let you build alone? My carpentry's decent enough. Between your masonry and my woodwork, we could make something solid. She felt a smile tugging at her mouth. Mr. Whitlock, are you proposing a construction partnership? Strictly business. Miss Reese, though I might have opinions about window placement. Eastern exposure. Naturally, good morning light's important. This time her smile broke free fully. Yes, it is. They talked through the night, planning buildings and improvements, discussing practical matters of supplies and timelines. But underneath ran a current of something else possibility, perhaps, or recognition. Two people who'd chosen solitude finding they might choose something different, if given time and space to build it properly. As dawn approached, Calder rose to start the coffee. Joanna watched him work, seeing not just the present moment but potential futures, seasons of building, working side by side, creating not just structures but something less tangible and more lasting. I'll go to town today, she said. Tell Mrs. Caldwell I'll take the church job. His hands stilled on the coffee pot. And after, I'll come back and we'll start framing my room. Can't have the mason sleeping on the floor if she's to do proper work. No, he agreed, something lightening in his expression. That wouldn't do at all. The sun rose, painting the wall she'd built golden red. It stood strong against the morning light, proof that broken things could be restored, that patient hands could create something lasting. Joanna thought of her father's words about knowing when to set a stone. Sometimes, she realized, you had to trust the foundation you'd built and place the next stone even without certainty. Sometimes the building itself would show you the way. The first snow of the evening was just beginning to fall when Joanna heard the crackling. She looked up from the ledger where she'd been calculating materials for the church foundation, initially dismissing the sound as settling wood. But then came the smell smoke, sharp and wrong. Fire! The shout came from outside, followed by running footsteps. Calder burst through the door, face grim. The old storage shed behind McCready's. It's going up fast. Joanna's blood chilled. That shed where she'd spent her first night in Dry Ridge, cold and alone with only her tools for comfort. She grabbed her coat, following Calder into the night. The scene in town was chaos. Flames leaped from the abandoned building, sparks swirling in the snow-laden wind toward the neighboring structures. Men had formed a bucket brigade, but it was clearly futile. The shed was fully engulfed, fire eating through the old wood like paper. Let it burn itself out, Mayor Thompson commanded. Keep the other buildings wet. That's all we can do. Joanna stood transfixed, watching her former shelter consumed. The flames painted everything orange and gold, transforming the decrepit building into something almost beautiful in its destruction. She felt Calder's presence beside her, solid and reassuring. Could have been me, she said quietly. Words meant only for him. If you hadn't offered work that morning, I'd have been sleeping there still. And if this had happened, his jaw tightened. Don't! It's true, though a different choice, a different morning. And you're here, he said firmly. Safe, that's what matters. The fire roared higher, and suddenly part of the roof collapsed inward with a shower of sparks. The crowd stepped back, faces lit by the inferno. Among them, Joanna noticed several of the young men who'd harassed them weeks ago, watching with expressions that seemed too satisfied for concerned citizens. "Probably kids," someone near them muttered, "playing with matches where they shouldn't." But Joanna remembered the torch waved near Calder's walls, the threats about railroad interests and unwelcome women. She glanced at Calder and saw the same suspicion in his eyes. The shed continued to burn as snow fell harder, creating an eerie contrast of fire and ice. Eventually, with the surrounding buildings safe, the crowd began to disperse. Joanna remained, unable to look away. "I thought I'd burn with it," she said suddenly. Calder turned to her, brow furrowed. "What?" "That night, when I was lying on that floor, cold and alone, everything I'd built torn away. I thought maybe it would be easier to just let go, let everything burn." She pulled her coat tighter. "I've never told anyone that." "Joanna, I'm not that person anymore," she continued. "But seeing it burn now, I remember her, that woman who thought she had no place left in the world." She finally looked at him. "You changed that. The work, yes, but more than that. The way you saw me as a mason first, everything else second. Do you know how rare that is?" Before he could respond, Reverend Morrison approached, face creased with concern. "Terrible thing. Thank the Lord no one was hurt." He glanced between them meaningfully. "Though I heard you once sheltered there. Miss Reese, Providence, perhaps, that you found other arrangements." "Providence in the form of a fallen wall," she agreed, ignoring his implication. "Speaking of which, I've made good progress on the church plans. The foundation will need—" Yes, I'm sure." The Reverend seemed distracted. "Though given tonight's events, perhaps we should discuss your living situation. Mrs. Brandt has mentioned—" "My living situation is settled." Joanna cut him off. "I room at the Whitlock place while completing his commissioned buildings. All quite proper and documented. Still, appearances are less important than reality." Calder interjected, "And the reality is that Miss Reese is the finest mason in 3 territories. You hired her for her skill, not her housing arrangements." The Reverend retreated, muttering about propriety. Around them, the last of the crowd wandered away, leaving just the fire crew monitoring the dying flames. Snow hissed as it hit the hot rubble. "We should go," Calder said. "Nothing more to do here." But Joanna stepped closer to the ruins, close enough to feel the heat on her face. "Wait!" She pulled something from her pocket, a small leather journal, worn and water-stained, the book where she'd kept her plans with Thomas, sketches of the house they'd build together, the life they'd share. She'd carried it all these months, unable to let go of who she'd thought she'd be. Without ceremony, she tossed it into the flames. The leather curled and blackened, pages flaring bright before crumbling to ash. Years of dreams, gone in seconds. But instead of loss, Joanna felt something lift from her shoulders. "What was that?" Calder asked quietly. "The past." She turned away from the fire. "Someone else's plans for my life. They needed burning." They walked back through the snowy streets in silence, but once they'd left the town behind, climbing the familiar trail to the house, Calder spoke. "You scared me tonight. I was never in danger. The fire." "Not the fire." He stopped walking, making her pause too. "What you said about thinking it would be easier to burn, that scared me more than any flames could." In the moonlight, his face was all plains and shadows, but his eyes were clear. "I know what it's like," he continued. "After Sarah left, I'd stand at the edge of the gorge sometimes, not planning anything, just considering how easy it would be to step forward instead of back, to stop fighting for something everyone said was foolish. What changed? Time, work, stubbornness." A slight smile. "And recently, watching someone else fight the same battle and win makes a man reconsider what's worth preserving." They resumed walking, but something had shifted. The careful distance they'd maintained, even while sharing a house, seemed suddenly artificial. At the house, Joanna moved to bank the fire for the night, their usual routine. But Calder caught her hand. Work roughened meeting, work roughened. Nothing delicate about it. "I'm glad you're here," he said simply. "Glad you didn't burn. Glad you're building instead." She turned her hand in his, palm to palm. "So am I." They stood that way for a moment, the touch saying what words couldn't. Then, by mutual accord, they separated to their usual spaces, but the warmth lingered, more than the fire could account for. That night, Joanna lay wakeful again, but not from fear or cold or uncertainty. She thought about the shed burning, about letting go of old dreams to make room for new ones, about hands that matched hers in strength and understanding. From the loft came the sound of Calder shifting, also awake. "Joanna." "Yes." "That journal you burned, were there designs in it for buildings?" "Some. A house, mostly. 3 bedrooms, a parlor, the kind of kitchen meant for servants to work in." She laughed softly. "Nothing I'd build now." "What would you build if you could design anything?" She considered. Something honest. Stone foundation, of course. Timber frame, but practical. Big windows for light. A kitchen meant for living in. Not just cooking, and... She paused. "And a workshop attached, for days when the weather's too bad for outside work, but hands still need to be busy." "Sounds like a good house." "It does." Quiet fell again, but companionable now. Then Calder said, "I've been thinking about the new stable. Might attach a workshop to it, for mending tack, storing tools. Could build it large enough for other work, too. Masonry projects, maybe." "That's practical." "Yes, practical." She smiled in the darkness. "Calder. When I finish the church foundation and your outbuildings, what then?" A long pause. Hadn't thought that far ahead, which was clearly a lie, but a gentle one. "Because I was thinking," she continued, "a property like this could use ongoing maintenance, seasonal work, repairs, improvements. Might make sense to have a permanent arrangement, for practical reasons." "Might make sense," he agreed carefully. "Though the town will always talk, whether I live here or at Mrs. Brant's or on the moon. At least here, I'm building something real." "Is that what we're doing? Building something?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Joanna thought of all the careful words they'd danced around, all the boundaries they'd drawn to protect themselves from wanting too much. "I think so," she said finally. "Stone by stone, same as any structure, making sure the foundation's true before adding the next level." "And is it true?" "Getting there," she heard him exhale, long and slow. "Good, that's good." Sleep came easier after that, the house settling around them with familiar creaks and sighs. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the trail to town, blanketing the world in clean white. By morning, even the smoke from the burned shed would be gone, leaving only memory and ash. But here, in this house on the hill, something new was taking shape. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with the same patient craft that built walls to last generations. 2 people who'd thought themselves meant for solitude, discovering that some things were better built together. In the morning, there would be coffee and work and the comfortable rhythm they'd established. The church foundation to plan, the new room to frame, a life to construct piece by careful piece. But tonight, there was just the warmth of understanding, the peace of being truly seen, and the knowledge that some structures, the most important ones, couldn't be rushed. Joanna's breathing deepened into sleep, and soon Calder's followed. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on walls that had witnessed transformation. Where once had stood a broken section, now rose straight courses of stone, mortared with skill and care. A metaphor, perhaps, or simply proof that broken things need not stay broken, that patient hands could rebuild what storm and time had damaged. Either way, it was enough. The shed in town was ashes now, that temporary shelter consumed by flames, but here stood something more lasting: walls built not just of stone but of mutual respect, shared solitude, and the growing certainty that some foundations were worth the risk of building upon. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The railroad men wouldn't give up easily. The town would continue to whisper and judge. The work would be hard and the payment uncertain. But tonight, in a house that had become a home, two souls who'd thought themselves destined for isolation slept peacefully, no longer alone though still apart. And in that careful distance lay not fear, but promise of walls yet to be built, of spaces yet to be shared, of a future constructed one deliberate stone at a time. The snow continued to fall, erasing tracks and softening edges, making the world new and full of possibility. And somewhere in the ruins of the burned shed, among the ashes of old dreams, the wind stirred the embers one last time before letting them die. Some things needed to burn so others could be built. Joanna Reese, mason and woman and survivor, understood that now. Just as she understood that the best structures, be they walls or relationships or lives worth living, took time and skill and the courage to keep building despite the certainty of storms. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a nervous clerk from the land office who wouldn't meet Calder's eyes. Joanna was mixing mortar for the church foundation when she saw him riding hard back up the trail, his face dark as winter storm clouds. "What is it?" She set down her trowel as he dismounted. He handed her the letter without a word. Official letterhead, the seal of the Colorado Pacific Railroad Company. She read quickly, her heart sinking with each line. The railroad had filed a claim of eminent domain. Calder had 60 days to accept their revised offer, considerably less than the original, or face legal proceedings. Can they do this? With enough lawyers and money, they can do anything. He took the letter back, crumpling it slightly. Judge Harrison in Denver is in their pocket. If it goes to court, you'll lose the land. Unless I can prove I'm using it productively, making improvements that serve the community good. His laugh was bitter. Hard to do when the bank's suddenly reluctant to extend credit and suppliers are slow to deliver materials. Joanna wiped her hands clean, mind racing. What about the horses, your breeding program? Not enough. They want buildings, commerce, something that looks like progress on paper. He slumped against the fence. Maybe it's time to admit defeat. Take what they're offering and start over somewhere else. No. The word came sharp and immediate. This is your land. Your father's land. You don't give that up because some railroad baron decided he wants it. Then what do I do? Joanna fight lawyers with what good intentions? She was quiet for a moment, then said, You fight them with progress. Real progress. Not their kind. She gestured toward the house. What if we accelerated the building plans? Not just a stable and workshop, but something bigger. With what money? The bank? Not the bank. Me. She saw his expression and continued quickly. I have savings, not much, but enough for materials. We build what you need to show productivity, document everything, make it impossible for them to claim the land's underutilized. I can't take your money. Not take, invest. She met his eyes steadily. Partners. Remember, this threatens my work too. If you lose the land, I lose my position. It's practical. He studied her face, searching for something. This goes beyond practical. Yes, she agreed simply. It does. That afternoon, they sat at the kitchen table with paper and pencils, sketching plans, not just for a stable, but for a proper horse operation training facilities, breeding barns, even a small house for a potential foreman. Joanna's experience with commercial buildings combined with Calder's knowledge of horses to create something ambitious but achievable. We'll need help, Joanna said. Can't build all this ourselves in 60 days. The Garrett boys might work. They're good with timber. And they've no love for the railroad after it bought out their father's farm for pennies. Calder made notes. Maybe Tom Sawyer, too. He's been looking for work since the mine closed. I'll adjust my schedule at the church. Work there mornings, here afternoons and evenings. She looked at the sketches again. It's possible. Just barely, but possible. That night, unable to sleep, Joanna found herself standing at the window, looking out at the land bathed in moonlight. She heard Calder descend from the loft, felt him join her at the window. Why? He asked quietly. Why fight so hard for this? She considered her words carefully. My whole life, I've been told to make myself smaller, quieter, more acceptable. And for a while, with Thomas, I tried. She turned to face him. But you've never asked me to be anything but what I am. This place, this land, it's the first spot I've stood where I didn't feel like I was taking up too much space. Joanna, I won't let them take that, she continued. Not from you, not from me. We build Calder. It's what we do, so we build our way out of this. He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the first truly tender gesture he'd made. All right, we build. The next weeks became a blur of activity, true to his word. Calder recruited help not just the Garrett brothers and Tom Sawyer, but others who had their own grievances with the railroad. The work site became a hub of purposeful energy, men raising walls while Joanna laid foundations. She split her time between the church and the ranch, often working by lantern light until her hands shook with exhaustion. But every completed wall, every set beam was a small victory against those who would take what wasn't theirs. It was during the second week that she noticed Calder favoring his left side. He'd been moving slowly all morning, and when he reached for a high beam, she saw him wince. What's wrong? Nothing, just slept wrong. But sweat beaded his forehead despite the cool air. Calder. She stepped closer, saw how he held himself carefully. You're hurt. It's nothing, he repeated. But when she placed a gentle hand on his side, he flinched. Let me see. Joanna. Let me see. Reluctantly, he lifted his shirt. A spreading bruise marked his ribs. Purple, black, and angry, her intake of breath was sharp. When did this happen? Yesterday. Horse spooked, caught me against the fence. It's just bruised. Maybe cracked. You need to rest. Can't rest. We've only got 5 weeks left. And you'll be no use if you collapse. She guided him to sit on a nearby crate. The men can work without you for 1 day. But no arguments. She surprised herself with the authority in her voice. Tom, take over here. I'm taking Mr. Whitlock to the house. She half expected him to fight, but he allowed her to help him up the trail. Inside, she settled him in a chair and went to work, preparing cold compresses and brewing willow bark tea. Her movements were sure despite never having played nurse before. Where'd you learn doctoring? He asked, watching her work. Same place I learned everything else, necessity. She handed him the tea. Drink. It'll help with the pain. He obeyed, then caught her hand as she turned away. Thank you. For what being practical can't have my business partner unable to work. For caring whether I can work or not. The honesty in his voice made her still. They'd been dancing around the truth for weeks now, hiding behind talk of partnership and practicality. But here, with afternoon light slanting through the windows and his hand warm on hers, pretense seemed pointless. I do care, she said softly. More than is probably wise. Wisdom's overrated. He tugged gently, bringing her closer. I've been wise my whole life. Look where it got me alone on a hill, fighting the railroad with nothing but determination and a woman who's too stubborn to run when she should. I don't run, not anymore. No, you build instead. His free hand came up to cup her face. Joanna, A shout from outside broke the moment. They pulled apart as Tom Sawyer burst through the door. Riders coming railroad men, by the look of them. Calder tried to stand, but Joanna pressed him back. Stay. I'll handle this. Joanna, trust me. She stepped onto the porch as 6 men rode up. The leader, a thin man in a city suit despite the rural setting, dismounted with practiced arrogance. Miss Reese, isn't it? His smile was oil-slick. I'm Mr. Pemberton, representing the Colorado Pacific. I understand you're the one orchestrating this ambitious construction project. I'm the mason, Mr. Whitlock hired, yes. Ah, and where is Mr. Whitlock? I have business with him. Then you have business with me. I'm his authorized representative in all matters concerning these improvements. Pemberton's eyebrows rose. A woman, how progressive. He looked around at the rising structures. Though I wonder if you understand the full situation. The railroad's claim is being contested through demonstration of productive land use. Joanna interrupted. As you can see, Mr. Whitlock is developing this property into a significant horse breeding and training operation. The improvements will serve the community by providing quality stock and employment. Improvements funded how we understand the local bank has been conservative with lending. Joanna smiled thinly. Private investment, Mr. Pemberton, all perfectly legal and documented. Your investment. I presume how touching, though one wonders what return you expect on such a personal loan. The implication in his tone made her jaw clench, but she kept her voice level. I expect the return any investor would a share in a profitable enterprise, unless the railroad has issues with women owning businesses. Not at all, though I'd hate to see you lose your money when this enterprise fails. The offer stands. Will continue to stand rejected, Calder said from the doorway. Despite Joanna's protests, he'd risen, moving carefully but with authority. My land isn't for sale at any price. Pemberton's smile never wavered. We'll see about that. 60 days. Mr. Whitlock. Well, 43 now. I do hope your Lady Mason can work miracles. After they left, Calder sagged against the doorframe. Joanna quickly moved to support him. So much for staying put, she chided gently. Couldn't let you face them alone. I was doing fine. You were magnificent. He allowed her to guide him back inside. Pemberton didn't know what to do with you. Good. Let them underestimate me. They'll learn otherwise. As she settled him back in the chair, he caught her hand again. Joanna, what I was trying to say before can wait, she said gently. Rest now. We have buildings to raise and railroad men to thwart. Everything else. We'll have time for everything else after. But even as she said it, she wondered if it was true. 43 days to save not just land, but the life they were carefully constructing together. Time enough to build walls and barns, perhaps. But was there time to build what truly mattered, the trust and connection that had grown between them like morning glory through stone that remained to be seen? Outside, hammers rang and men called to each other, the sound of progress despite all obstacles. Joanna looked at Calder, drowsing now from the willow bark tea, and made a silent promise. They would not lose this. Not the land, not the chance at something real and lasting. She'd built too much to let it crumble now. 43 days. She'd faced worse odds with less at stake. And this time, she wasn't building alone. The fever came on sudden and fierce, 3 weeks before the railroad's deadline. Joanna had noticed Calder moving slower that morning, attributed it to the bruised ribs that still pained him. But by noon, she found him collapsed in the half-built stable, burning with heat despite the December cold. Just need a moment, he mumbled as she knelt beside him, but his eyes were glazed and unfocused. Tom, she called sharply, help me get him to the house, now. Together they half-carried, half-dragged Calder up the trail. Inside, Joanna worked with desperate efficiency, stripping his sweat-soaked shirt, piling blankets, setting water to heat. His temperature was dangerously high, skin flushed and dry. Should I fetch the doctor? Tom asked, hovering anxiously. Doctor, Mills is in Denver until next week. She wrung out a cool cloth, placed it on Calder's forehead. I'll manage. But Tom, the work has to continue. Every day counts. You can't nurse him and oversee construction both. Watch me. Her tone brooked no argument. Get back to the site. I'll be there when I can. For 4 days, Joanna barely left Calder's side. She spooned broth between his cracked lips, changed sweat-drenched bedding, battled the fever with cool cloths and sheer determination. He rambled in delirium about his father, about horses, about walls that wouldn't stand straight. Can't let them take it, he muttered, fingers clutching at empty air. Promised I'd keep it safe. Shh, she caught his hand, held it firm. The land's safe. We're building, just like we planned. You just need to get well. On the 3rd night, his fever spiked dangerously. Joanna found herself praying something she hadn't done since her father's death. Not to a distant god, but to whatever forces govern life and death, love and loss. Please, she whispered, bathing his burning skin. Not now. Not when we're so close to something good. Whether from prayer or persistence. The fever broke near dawn. Calder's breathing eased, his skin cooling under her touch. She slumped beside the bed, exhaustion hitting her like a physical blow. Joanna! His voice was hoarse but lucid. I'm here. She straightened, brushed damp hair from his forehead. How do you feel? Like I've been trampled by my own horses. He tried to sit up, grimaced. The building is progressing fine. Tom's managing the crew. We've got the stable walls up and started on the breeding barn. She pressed him back gently. Your job is to rest. Can't rest. Only 2.5 weeks left. Calder. She took his face between her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. Listen to me. You nearly died. Do you understand that I sat here for 3 nights wondering if each breath would be your last? Something in her voice made him still. Joanna? No, let me finish. Her hands trembled slightly. I've lost everyone who mattered to me. My mother before I could know her. My father to sickness. Thomas to his own cowardice. I won't, her voice cracked. I won't lose you too. Not to fever, not to the railroad, not to your own stubborn pride. He reached up, covered one of her hands with his. You won't lose me. Promise me, promise you'll rest, get well. The buildings mean nothing if... She couldn't finish. If what? If you're not here to share them with... The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Calder turned his hand, lacing their fingers together. I promise, he said quietly. But Joanna, you need to rest too. When's the last time you slept? She couldn't remember. The days had blurred together in a haze of construction and caretaking. I'm fine. No, you're not. He tugged weakly at their joined hands. Come here. Calder. Just lie down, please. You can't take care of everyone if you collapse. Too tired to argue. She stretched out beside him on top of the blankets, careful not to jostle his still tender ribs. He wrapped an arm around her, drawing her close. This is highly improper, she murmured against his shoulder. Everything about us is improper, he replied. Why stop now? Despite everything, the deadline looming, the work waiting, the uncertain future, she found herself relaxing into his warmth. For the first time in days, she felt something like peace. Joanna. His voice was drowsy but determined. When this is over, when we've saved the land, we need to talk. Really talk. About us. I know. I'm tired of pretending this is just business. I know that too. He pressed a kiss to her hair, gentle and undemanding. Good, just wanted that clear. They slept through the morning and into afternoon. The first real rest either had taken in weeks. When Joanna finally stirred, she found Tom Sawyer sitting quietly by the door, standing guard. Didn't want to wake you, he said softly. Crew's doing fine. Got the barn frame near done. Thank you. She carefully extracted herself from Calder's embrace. I'll be down shortly. But Calder's hand caught hers. Take care of what needs doing, he said, more alert than she'd expected. But come back, please. The next days fell into a rhythm. Mornings she spent at the construction site, overseeing the work with an efficiency born of desperation. The men had rallied in Calder's absence, working longer hours without complaint. Even some townspeople had begun to help, drawn by curiosity or sympathy or simple opposition to railroad overreach. Afternoons and evenings she devoted to Calder, watching him grow stronger with each passing day. They talked during those quiet hours not about buildings or deadlines, but about dreams deferred and hopes newly born. He told her about his mother, who died when he was 12, leaving recipes he still couldn't quite recreate. She shared memories of job sites with her father, the satisfaction of seeing their work stand tall against the sky. With 1 week remaining, Calder insisted on returning to work despite Joanna's protests. He moved carefully, mindful of his limitations, but his presence energized the crew. The structures were nearly complete stable. Barn, workshop, even the small foreman's house. All that remained was finish work and documentation. It was Mrs. Caldwell, surprisingly, who provided the final piece. She arrived on a Thursday morning, driven by her husband in their best carriage. I've come to see these famous improvements, she announced, surveying the construction with a critical eye. The whole town's talking. And what are they saying? Joanna asked warily. That you've done the impossible, built a proper operation in record time. She turned to Calder. My husband's bank may have been influenced by certain parties, but I have connections in Denver, investors looking for promising ventures. Calder frowned. Why would you help us? Because the railroad's gotten too bold, thinking they can dictate everything in these parts. Her expression hardened. And because I respect those who fight for what's theirs. Miss Reese, your work here has been exemplary. Perhaps we judged too hastily. It wasn't an apology, but from Eleanor Caldwell. It was close enough. She departed with promises of letters to Denver contacts, leaving Joanna and Calder standing among their nearly completed buildings. Think she means it? Joanna asked. Eleanor Caldwell doesn't make empty promises. He looked around at what they'd built. We might actually do this. That evening, as purple dusk settled over the mountains, they walked through the structures together. Everything was solid, purposeful, real. The stable could house 20 horses comfortably. The breeding barn was state-of-the-art. The workshop had space for both their trades. It's good work, Joanna said, running her hand along a beam she'd helped raise. The best. But Calder was looking at her, not the buildings. Joanna. I know. We need to talk. She turned to face him fully. You almost died, and all I could think was that I'd never told you. She stopped, gathered courage. I love you. I've been falling in love with you since that first morning when you didn't blink at my tools or my trade. When you just saw me. Joanna. I don't expect anything. I know this wasn't the plan, but I couldn't let another day pass without... He silenced her with a kiss, sudden and sure. When they parted, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you too, he said simply. Have for weeks. Maybe since I saw you ready to brain me with that hammer. A smile touched his lips. Thought to myself, there's a woman who won't break under pressure. I almost did, when you were sick. But you didn't. You held everything together, me. The construction, the whole damn fight against the railroad. His hands framed her face. I don't want a business partner. Joanna, I want a wife. If you'll have a stubborn fool who nearly got himself killed rather than admit he needed help. Only if you'll have a woman who works in men's clothes and scandalizes proper society. Wouldn't have you any other way. They kissed again as snow began to fall. Light and perfect as a blessing. Around them stood the evidence of what two determined people could build together, not just structures of wood and stone, but a future neither had dared imagine alone. "The railroad agent comes tomorrow," Calder said eventually. "Let him come. We have everything documented, photographed, notarized." She smiled, fierce and bright. "They wanted improvements. We've given them a transformation." That night, they slept side by side without pretense or apology. Tomorrow would bring challenges, legal battles. Perhaps, certainly judgment from those who'd never understand their choices. But tonight, they had walls they'd raised together and the warmth of promises made without reservation. Joanna dreamed not of falling walls, but of rising ones. Of buildings yet to be constructed and a life built day by day, stone by stone, on foundations strong enough to weather any storm. When she woke, Calder was already up, stoking the fire and starting coffee, their morning ritual now shared and cherished. She rose to help, and together they prepared for whatever battle the day would bring. They'd built something worth fighting for. Now they just had to defend it. The sun rose clear and bright, setting the snow-covered buildings gleaming like hope itself. Somewhere, railroad lawyers prepared their arguments and society matrons sharpened their tongues. But here, in a house that had become a home, two people who'd chosen building over breaking stood ready to face it all. Together, the night was still as death, the kind of quiet that made every small sound carry like thunder. Joanna lay awake beside Calder, his breathing deep and even in sleep. Tomorrow the railroad officials would come for their final inspection. Tomorrow would determine everything. She slipped from the bed, careful not to wake him, and padded to the window. The new building stood solid in the moonlight, testament to what determination and desperate love could accomplish. But would it be enough? "Can't sleep." She turned to find Calder propped on one elbow, watching her with those steady eyes that had first made her trust him. "I keep thinking about all the things that could go wrong," she admitted. "What if the documentation isn't sufficient? What if they've already decided against us?" He rose, came to stand behind her, arms encircling her waist. "Then we keep fighting, together." "I'm not used to that, the together part." She leaned back against his warmth. "I've been alone so long, fighting my own battles." "I know." His voice was gentle against her hair. "But you don't have to be alone anymore. Not unless you choose it." She turned in his arms, looking up at his face silvered by moonlight. "I don't want to sleep," she whispered, echoing words she'd spoken in dreams weeks ago. "I want to stay here, in this moment, where everything we've built still stands." Understanding crossed his features. Without a word, he took her hand and led her to the chair by the banked fire. He sat, drawing her onto his lap, holding her close but chaste. They stayed that way as the hours crept by, drawing strength from each other's presence. "Tell me about after," she said eventually. "After we win." "When we win," he corrected. "We'll finish your room properly. Add those eastern windows you wanted. Maybe build a greenhouse off the kitchen for herbs through the winter." "And the horses? Best breeding operation in Colorado?" "We'll need more help eventually. Maybe take on apprentices." His arms tightened slightly. "And someday, if you want, children to teach both our trades to." The image bloomed in her mind, small hands learning to lay straight courses, to gentle, spooked horses, a future neither had dared imagine alone. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Though they'd be unconventional children, raised by parents who refuse to follow society's rules. They'd be strong, independent, skilled with their hands and minds both." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Like their mother." Dawn came too soon, painting the sky pale pink and gold. They rose, dressed carefully, Joanna in her best dress, the one she'd worn to meet Mrs. Caldwell about the church job. Calder in his father's suit, altered to fit his broader frame. "You look beautiful," he said, watching her pin up her hair. "I look respectable. There's a difference." But she smiled, smoothing her skirts. Though after today, I'm burning this dress. I want to face our future in clothes that let me work. After today, he agreed. The railroad delegation arrived at 10 sharp Mr. Pemberton with his oily smile, 2 lawyers with sharp eyes and sharper pencils, and, surprisingly, Judge Harrison himself. Behind them came half the town, drawn by curiosity and the promise of drama. Mr. Whitlock, Miss Reese. Pemberton's gaze lingered on Joanna with barely concealed disdain. Shall we inspect these improvements you claim to have made? They walked through each building slowly, Calder explaining the operation's scope while Joanna presented documentation receipts, contracts, architectural plans, all meticulously organized. The lawyers took notes, whispered among themselves, while Judge Harrison maintained an unreadable expression. In the breeding barn, Pemberton ran his hand along a beam, clearly hoping to find shoddy workmanship. His frown when he found none was deeply satisfying. This is all very impressive, he admitted grudgingly. But the question remains whether it serves sufficient community benefit to override the railroad's claim. Perhaps I can speak to that. Everyone turned. Eleanor Caldwell stepped forward, accompanied by 3 men in Denver suits. Gentlemen, allow me to introduce Mr. Davies, Mr. Sherman, and Mr. Alcott. They represent an investment consortium interested in Mr. Whitlock's operation. She smiled, sharp as winter wind. They've reviewed the plans and are prepared to invest substantially, pending resolution of this land dispute. This is highly irregular, Pemberton began. No more irregular than the railroad attempting to seize productive land through manipulated courts. Mrs. Caldwell interrupted. I've also brought letters from 6 neighboring ranches expressing interest in breeding contracts. This operation will serve the entire region. Judge Harrison finally spoke. I'll need to review all documentation before making a determination. Of course. Joanna stepped forward with a leather portfolio. Everything is here, Your Honor, including affidavits from the construction crew about the timeline and methods used. As the judge retreated to the house to review papers, the crowd milled restlessly. Some of the townspeople who'd been coldest to Joanna now nodded respectfully. Building something from nothing had a way of changing minds. Whatever happens, Reverend Morrison said quietly, approaching them, you've both shown remarkable character. The church foundation is progressing beautifully. Miss Reese, we're fortunate to have you. 2 hours passed before Judge Harrison emerged. The crowd fell silent. After reviewing all documentation and considering the evidence presented, he began formally. I find that Mr. Whitlock has indeed demonstrated productive use of this land. The improvements are substantial, serve clear community benefit, and represent significant investment. Joanna's hand found Calder's, gripping tight. Therefore, I must deny the railroad's claim of eminent domain. The land remains with its rightful owner. The crowd erupted. Some cheered, others muttered darkly, but Joanna heard none of it. She was too busy being swept into Calder's arms, lifted off her feet in an embrace that scandalized the proper folk and delighted everyone else. We did it, he breathed against her ear. You did it. We, she corrected, laughing and crying at once. Always we. Pemberton's face was purple with rage. This isn't over. Whitlock, the railroad has long reach. And I have good lawyers. Mrs. Caldwell interjected smoothly, provided by my Denver associates. Do run along, Mr. Pemberton. You're no longer needed here. As the railroad men retreated in defeat, the townspeople pressed forward with congratulations. Even Mrs. Henderson from the general store offered grudging praise for Joanna's work. But it was Tom Sawyer who summed it up best. Guess this proves it. Sometimes the best man for a job is a woman who won't back down. That evening, after the crowds dispersed and papers were signed with the Denver investors, Joanna and Calder stood alone among their buildings. The setting sun painted everything golden, and the future stretched before them full of possibility. "So," Calder said, pulling her close, "what now?" "Now we build our life. Properly this time. No pretense, no careful distances." She looked up at him. "Though I suppose we should make it official, for the sake of those investors." "Is that a proposal, Miss Reese?" "It's a suggestion. Mr. Whitlock, unless you have objections to marrying a woman who'll scandalize society until her dying day." "Only one objection." He cupped her face gently. "I wanted to ask first. Joanna Reese, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me on this land we've fought to save? Will you be my partner in all things, conventional or not?" "Yes," she said simply. "To all of it, yes." They kissed as the first stars appeared. There, among the buildings they'd raised from desperate hope. Tomorrow there would be plans to make, contracts to finalize, a wedding that would set tongues wagging for months. But tonight, they simply stood together, looking at what they'd built and dreaming of what yet could be. The main house needed expansion. Joanna's single room seemed insufficient now. The workshop could use a forge for metalwork, perhaps a garden plot near the kitchen. "We'll need good stone for the house foundation," Joanna mused. "Something that will last generations." "Already thinking like a Whitlock." Calder teased, "Building for permanence." "I've spent too long on temporary things," she replied. "From now on, I only build to last." As they walked back to the house, their house lanterns began appearing in the windows of Dry Ridge below. The town that had once rejected Joanna now glowed with the warmth of acceptance, or at least respect. "No more sleeping on floors," Calder said as they entered. "No more careful distances or proper arrangements. No more being alone," Joanna added, "even when we're apart." They prepared for bed with the ease of long practice, but the anticipation of new beginning. The fire crackled in the hearth, warming the rooms that had witnessed their careful dance from strangers to partners to something deeper than either had words for. "Joanna," Calder said as they settled beneath the quilts. That first night, in the shed, did you really think about letting it all burn?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I thought about giving up, about letting the world win." She turned to face him in the darkness. But then morning came. And there you were, offering work instead of pity, purpose instead of judgment. You saved me that day, though neither of us knew it. "We saved each other," he corrected, "and we'll keep saving each other every day in all the small ways that matter." "Is that a promise?" "That's a vow." They slept entwined, no longer careful of propriety or appearances. In the morning there would be coffee and work and the comfortable rhythm of shared purpose. But tonight they simply held each other, two souls who'd chosen to build rather than burn. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the world in pristine white. But inside was warmth and safety and the quiet joy of love acknowledged and returned. The walls stood strong around them, mortared with more than stone, with trust, respect, and the unshakable certainty that some things were worth fighting for. Tomorrow they would begin the rest of their lives. But tonight, for the first time in longer than either could remember, they wanted nothing more than sleep peaceful, untroubled, and shared. The lantern burned low, casting dancing shadows on walls that had witnessed transformation. Where once a woman had whispered, "I don't want to sleep," from fear and sorrow, now she whispered it from joy too complete for dreams. And when sleep finally claimed them, it was gentle as the falling snow, deep as the foundations they'd laid, and sweet as the promise of all the mornings yet to come. Spring came early that year, melting the snow from the mountains and turning the prairie around Dry Ridge into a carpet of wildflowers. 6 months had passed since the railroad's defeat. 6 months that had transformed not just the Whitlock property, but the very fabric of life in the valley. Joanna stood in the doorway of her workshop, no longer just a corner of the stable, but a proper building with windows facing east and shelves for her growing collection of specialized tools. 3 young women worked at benches inside, learning to mix mortar and true align, the first graduates of what folks had taken to calling Mrs. Whitlock's Masonry School. "Keep your wrists straight, Mary," she advised, watching the banker's daughter struggle with a trowel. "The tool does the work if you let it." Strange how quickly the town had shifted from scandal to pride. The woman they'd once whispered about now taught their daughters a trade. The improper arrangement they'd condemned had become a marriage that somehow made perfect sense. Mrs. Whitlock. Sarah Coleman, the mayor's niece, looked up from her practice wall. "Will you tell us again about the night you slept in the shed?" Joanna smiled. The story had become something of a legend among her students, the mason who'd arrived with nothing but tools and determination, who'd built her way to belonging. "Another time. You've got walls to finish before lunch." She turned at the sound of hoofbeats. "And it seems we have visitors." A carriage rolled up the drive, finer than any usually seen in these parts. From it stepped a woman in traveling clothes, her bearing rigid with nervous energy. Behind her, a man emerged slowly, his face marked by years of hard living. Joanna's breath caught. She knew that face, though it was more lined than memory suggested. Thomas. Thomas Hartley stood before her, hat in hand, looking nothing like the confident politician who'd once demanded she choose between her work and his ring. Beside him, the woman, his wife, presumably studied Joanna with curious eyes. "Joanna, Mrs. Whitlock now. I hear—" His voice was smaller than she remembered. "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion. What brings you to Colorado?" She kept her tone neutral, though her pulse quickened, not with old feeling, but with the strange sensation of seeing a ghost from another life. "Business. The legislature is considering new building codes. I'm part of the commission." He gestured awkwardly. "This is my wife, Catherine." Catherine stepped forward with surprising warmth. "I've wanted to meet you, Mrs. Whitlock. Thomas has told me about your skill with masonry. I wondered, that is. I hoped might we see your work." Joanna studied them both, seeing what she'd missed in her first surprise. Thomas's fine clothes couldn't hide the stoop of his shoulders, the defeat in his eyes. Catherine's warmth barely covered desperate hope. "Of course," she said finally. "My students would benefit from seeing their work appreciated." She led them through the workshop, explaining techniques and pointing out particularly good examples of her students' progress. Catherine asked intelligent questions while Thomas remained largely silent, his gaze moving between the working women and Joanna's confident instruction. "It's remarkable," Catherine said finally. "In Kansas City, such training simply doesn't exist for women." "It didn't exist here either," Joanna replied. "Sometimes you have to build what's missing." "Indeed." Catherine glanced at her husband. "Thomas, perhaps you should ask—" "Catherine," his voice held warning, but she pressed on. "Mrs. Whitlock, I'll be direct. My husband's political career has stalled. Some unfortunate investments, some bridges burned." She straightened her shoulders. "I come from money, but my father insists Thomas prove himself in honest work before he'll help us again. I've suggested he return to what he knows, construction, but he needs someone who understands both building and business." Thomas finished heavily. "Someone with proven success. I came to offer you a partnership. Joanna, your expertise, my connections back east. We could—" "No." The word came gentle but firm, cutting through his rehearsed speech. Joanna felt no satisfaction in his visible deflation, only a sort of distant pity. "I see." He turned to go, but she caught his arm. "I said no to partnership, but I might consider a different arrangement." She glanced at Catherine, reading desperation beneath the composed exterior. "My school needs Eastern connections for placing graduates. If you could facilitate that legitimately—" Properly documented, I'd be willing to provide recommendations for your construction efforts, letters of introduction to suppliers, perhaps some technical consultation by mail. Hope flickered in Catherine's eyes. You'd do that after he decided my hands were too rough for a mayor's wife. Joanna smiled without bitterness. That was another life. I'm grateful for it now. His rejection led me here, as if summoned by her thoughts. Calder appeared from the direction of the stables, their 2-year-old daughter perched on his shoulders. Little Anna had her mother's determined chin and her father's steady gaze, and dust already covered her small hands from helping in the workshop that morning. Visitors, Calder asked mildly, but his arm came protective around Joanna's waist. Old acquaintances, Joanna said. Mr. and Mrs. Hartley from Kansas City. They're interested in the school's placement program. Understanding dawned in Calder's eyes, but he merely extended his free hand. Welcome to Whitlock Ranch. Will you stay for lunch? The meal was cordial, if strange past and present sharing a table, with Anna chattering happily about her rock collection and the baby horses in the pasture. Catherine gradually relaxed, even laughing when Anna solemnly presented her with a special building stone from her pocket. But Thomas remained stiff, his gaze moving between the comfortable home, the thriving business visible through the windows, and the easy partnership between Joanna and Calder. I was a fool, he said suddenly as they prepared to leave. I had something precious and threw it away because it didn't fit my narrow vision. Yes, Joanna agreed simply. You did, but it led us both where we needed to be. Catherine took her hand at the carriage. Thank you for your grace, your help. I hope this will be good for him. For us. Build something true, Joanna advised. The rest follows. As their carriage rolled away, Calder slipped his arm around her. That was generous, more than he deserved. Maybe, but did you see her face? She loves him despite his failures. The way, she turned to face him, the way you loved me despite mine. You never failed. You just hadn't found where you fit yet. He kissed her softly. Lucky for me. Anna tugged at Joanna's skirts. Mama, can I show the students my tower? After their lesson. Sweet one. She swung her daughter up onto her hip, marveling as always at this small person they'd created. Though I think Aunt Mary might let you help with her wall if you ask nicely. They walked back to the workshop together, Anna babbling about her plans for the biggest tower ever. Through the windows, Joanna could see her students bent over their work, determined to master this trade that might take them anywhere. That evening, after Anna was tucked in bed and the house had settled into quiet, Joanna found herself once again standing at the window. But now she looked out at accomplishment rather than uncertainty, the original buildings they'd frantically constructed to save the land, the newer additions built with care and time, the small houses rising at the property's edge for the married workers Calder now employed. Remembering, Calder joined her, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders. Thinking how different it all looks. That first night, your house felt so empty, cold. Now it's full of life, students, workers, horses, chickens. Somehow did you know Anna's been feeding them in secret, and soon... He placed a hand gentle on her still flat stomach. Soon another little builder, she agreed, though this one might prefer horses to hammers. Or both. No reason to choose just one path. He turned her to face him. Joanna, that night you said you didn't want to sleep. Do you remember why? Because I was afraid. Of dreaming, of waking, of facing another day with nothing solid to hold. She smiled, touching his face. I haven't felt that way in so long now. These days when I say it, yes, it's because I don't want to miss anything. Anna's laugh, your smile, the sound of hammers in the workshop. Life is so full I begrudge the hours lost to sleep. He drew her closer, resting his chin on her hair. Then stay awake with me a while. Tomorrow's Sunday. We can sleep late, scandalize the town by missing early service. Calder Whitlock, you've turned me into a rebel. You were always a rebel. I just gave you a place to make a stand. They talked through the night as they had so many times before, planning and dreaming. The masonry school would expand. They'd had inquiries from as far as San Francisco. The horse operation was thriving under Calder's careful management and the expertise of their foreman, Tom Sawyer, who'd proved as good with animals as with timber. Father would be proud, Calder said as dawn approached. The land's everything he hoped it could be. Our fathers both, Joanna agreed. They gave us the skills. We just had to find the courage to use them. A small voice from the doorway interrupted. Mama, Papa, why are you awake? Anna padded over in her nightgown, rubbing sleepy eyes. Joanna lifted her into their nest of blankets, another piece of their unconventional family fitting perfectly into place. Sometimes grown-ups don't want to sleep either, Calder told her, when they're too happy to close their eyes. Oh, Anna considered this. Like Christmas morning. Exactly like Christmas morning. They watched the sun rise together, painting the mountains pink and gold, below in the valley. Dry Ridge was waking the town that had once rejected Joanna, now proud to claim her as their own. The first female master mason in Colorado, the newspapers said, the woman who'd built her way from nothing to everything. But Joanna knew better. She hadn't built from nothing, she'd built from stubbornness and skill, from Calder's steady faith and her father's teachings, from every stone laid true despite shaking hands. She'd built from the ashes of who she'd thought she should be into who she truly was. Mama, Anna's voice was drowsy against her shoulder. Will you teach me to build walls? If you want to learn. Good, then I can build a house for my horses. Calder chuckled, a girl after both our hearts. As the morning brightened, workers began arriving for their half-day Saturday shift. The sound of hammers and saws filled the air, the music of progress, of lives being constructed board by board, stone by stone. Joanna thought of that frightened woman who'd once slept in a shed, clutching a hammer for protection. That woman who'd whispered, I don't want to sleep from fear and loneliness. How strange and wonderful that the same words now meant something entirely different, not a plea against darkness, but a celebration of light. We should go in, she said eventually. Anna needs breakfast, and I promised to review plans with Mary before the noon break. But none of them moved yet, held by the perfection of the moment, a family forged not from convention but from choice, a home built on foundations of mutual respect, a future constructed day by day with patient hands and willing hearts. I love you, Calder said suddenly. Both of you, all of you. We love you too, Joanna replied, including Anna in the circle of her arms, now and always. Finally, they rose and went inside to start their day. There was work to do, there was always work to do, but it was good work, chosen work, the kind that built not just structures but lives worth living. The woman who'd once feared her rough hands would never be loved, now used them to shape careers and futures. The man who'd chosen solitude had found that some things were better shared. The child who grew between them would know a world where women could build and men could nurture, where worth wasn't measured in smooth skin but in true walls. And in the house on the hill above Dry Ridge, where a mason had found her home and a loner had found his heart. The morning light blessed everything it touched. The walls stood strong, mortared with love and determination. The future stretched bright with possibility. Joanna Whitlock, master mason and teacher, wife and mother and survivor, no longer whispered in the darkness. Instead, she built in the light. Each day a new stone in the edifice of a life worth living. And when night came, she slept peacefully in the arms of a man who saw her truly, no longer afraid of what morning might bring. For she had learned the greatest truth of all, that the strongest structures weren't built alone, and the best walls were those that sheltered love. In Dry Ridge, they still tell the story of the woman who came to town with nothing but tools and determination. They speak of the walls she built and the lives she changed, of the school that bears her name and the students who carry her teachings across the West. But those who knew her best remember something else, the way she and Calder looked at each other across crowded rooms, the sound of their daughter's laughter in the workshop, the sight of a family who'd built themselves as carefully and truly as any wall. And sometimes, on cold winter nights when the wind howls down from the mountains, someone will remember and repeat the words that became her legacy. Build true, build to last, and never be afraid to build again. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying I Don't Want to Sleep. Are you listening at home? During your commute? Or perhaps while working? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And let's create a community of Wild West story lovers. If you enjoyed this tale of Joanna and Calder's journey, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit that like button. And if you really want to help this story reach more listeners, please hit the hype button to boost this video. Your support helps keep these authentic frontier stories alive. Until next time, partners.